Hey, Wenjing, how you doing?
Hello, good, good, good. How are you?
Oh, good. Just trying to drop in whenever I can.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, I'm, I have too many meetings, too many things, and sometimes they conflict.
It's hard to, yeah, keep up.
Yeah, it really is. Well, this topic, of course, is still very, it's all the more important these days.
Yeah, it's finally taking shape actually. There's a lot of yeah, a lot of new work coming along. Mhm.
Yeah, well, I I do think, I mean, this was the idea that AI agents should have some identity has been around for a while, but it's all the more important these days to know who you're talking to.
Yeah, very interesting seeing all the uh what's up new. It's everything seems to be changing. New methodologies moving along. It's kind of experimenting.
Yeah, well, and unfortunately, much like earlier AI or machine learning or data science, whatever, few people really understand it.
Correct. Yes.
It's kind of a black box that people, oh, it must be good.
It must be. Uh,
Anyway,
yeah. I was reading something this morning, and it's a reporter writing about he was interviewing programmers, and the programmer need to give instructions or the prompts, and the prompt use terms like embarrassing and this. Basically, you talk to this bot agent, and there's no clear proof. I guess you can run the people reported some researchers, but how do you say it clearly impacts the effectiveness of the agent of
yeah,
conducting its work. So it's a
yeah,
fascinating thing to think about.
yeah. Well, the more extreme examples of the effective AI that people have relationships with, that there's that one story about the guy in Florida who went out looking for a actual physical robot to install the agent into and couldn't find it. And the agent says, "Well, the only way you can be with me is to join me in the digital world." He killed himself. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Uh, yeah, yeah.
Anyway, more to come.
Well, welcome. We have quite a lot of people today. That's great. So I'm doing a little bit of typing here. Let me put the schedule on so we can get started. All right. So today for folks who wasn't here yesterday, sorry, last week, we've been talking about a introduction section again right here. Oh, I've removed the link. Let me get the link. So we were talking about the introduction section of the TSP-enabled agent specification, and this and we've been discussing a few of the topics. What is an agent? What do we think about of it? How do we think of these informal data? So examples like soul agent.md or these kind of instructions. We also opened up a few other topics, but mostly I think we made the most progress on the first one. And so today's main goal is to summarize that and potentially then review a reference architecture I have in mind. I think will fit the direction well. And hopefully, that we will focus on that. If we have time, we can get into other topics. There's quite a few of them we have listed up. Um, so that's the agenda. Any input, anything people want to add on the agenda itself? And of course, I should give the antitrust notice and the IPR policy notice for trust of IP as well. Especially the second one, because we want to produce a specification. So if you haven't signed on to trust of IP's um, member agreement, I will encourage you to do that. That is the condition for you to actually actively contribute to. You're welcome otherwise to be a attendee and listen to fine. But in order to for the spec to have effect, we need that. So please do if you haven't yet. Okay. If not, I don't know, anyone is first time joining us. You want to give a introduction? I don't know. Haley, you were there last week, but I don't know whether I give you opportunity to say something, but feel free to.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you very much, Wenjing. I am working for a AI AGI blockchain product project, SingularityNet, and working on the reputation system within that area, that ecosystem for implementing reputation for trust on chain, both as an input to chain health metrics for the L1 we're building, and then that also transmits via
Yeah.
page rank like liquid algorithm to AI trust agents, services, AI oversight, as well as human governance, reputation based trust and participation systems. So, looking to build a system that incorporates humans, AIs, and systems like validators on chain or compute providers into one reputation system that liquidly shares and gives insight and input into an agent's overall trustworthiness, isness, and these things. So I'm very excited about this project, about everything that TOIP is doing here, and how that impacts and influences and can be brought into the thinking that we're doing, and how we can also, our project has been working on AGI-ish AGI systems and AGI open source AGI framework for our founders been working on it for decades. And so this gives us a unique perspective on not just what does AI look like right now in the world of LLMs. Wenjing, as you're very careful to point out in what is an agent, currently LLMs are the dominant, but what does that look like when systems are based in other areas or other capabilities? And I'm excited by the way this group is already very much looking both at the now and at the future. So, yeah, thank you.
Right. Um, let me see who else maybe. Mick.
Yeah. I'm Mick Bowman. I'm formerly currently retired from Intel, formerly a part of Intel Labs. I've been a part of Linux Foundation stuff for, oh gosh, 15 years now, something like that.
I see.
I think I was in the Hyperledger group pre-Drummond. So that'll age me on that. My interest here is largely that I participated in a DARPA-sponsored group called ISAT that was kind of doing horizon scanning work. And one of the things that we were interested in is looking at what a future of agentic computing looks like 10 years forward. And one of the issues that's come up is around how you establish identity, reputation, trust, and accountability in agents. And so, thanks to Drummond, who pointed me to this group, um, I'll at least sit in and listen. What's being said. So, thanks.
Thank you. No, Drummer, you have a hands up. Do you want to say something?
Haley already answered it. As soon as I saw, yeah, I was listening to her. I was actually about to start breakfast on my phone, and all of a sudden I went, "Wait a minute, wait a minute." She's describing something I heard about last week at the Kauai Summit. It was super cool. This Ben Gertzlaw that like coined this term AGI. It was an amazing talk, and I'm like, "Wait a minute, that's like Singularity.net. Does she work there?" Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, super cool. I just put in the chat there were four of us who gave presentations, and then we're on a panel that Daniela Barbosa, the executive director of LF Decentralized Trust, and moderated, and it was fabulous. I loved it, and Haley, you're in the right place. I'm going to put in a pitch for the other working group that you want to connect with, the Decentralized Trust Graph working group. I'm one of the co-chairs there. Um, and Wenjing and I are two of the three co-chairs of the trust banding protocol, which is layer 2 of the trust RP stack, which makes all these things possible. So glad you're here, and glad Mick's here. Anywhere Mick is, that's where the industry is looking, and he's their scout. So good to have you here, Mick.
Excellent. Oh, we have a Tim as well. So very good. Anyone else want to say something? We have a lot of long timers, but yeah, we haven't seen them for a while. All right. So if not, then let's kick start on the main topic of the day. And again, if we could get the first topic addressed, I think that's a very good one. I'm gonna go point to all of you to the Discord channel. So if you haven't joined yet, probably should. And and also there is a in the GitHub there's discussion on this too. So let me find the GitHub TSP. Agents. Okay, so it's coming up here. So if you go to discussions, and the first one really is a very long, very, I think, good one to read through. Is going about what is about an agent. And this really comes down to what we want to think about how this thing would, we could put this thing together. So rather than going through all of this, and there's a Discord channel as well, what I would do is I'm just jump in to show you a diagram. I've been different versions I've been sharing in the past, so we can basically look at a diagram and maybe summarize the discussion we had already. Um, and one of the issues I think in the Discord discussion that comes really interesting is about rules or policies we want our agent to obey, right? And then in the past, there's a lot of role definitions and role-based access control, for example, in traditional systems is probably dominant. So you define a role, and then this agent is supposed to play that role. And if you think of that way, then the agent software may be considered as, I think I'm using the word ephemeral. And Steve, we could explore that a little further. Then the system works quite neat, cleanly. So you can define a role. Let's say we take an example of a lot of companies will probably have assistants as it deployed in the enterprise space, right? You can, a travel agent is an assistant, a IT admin, assistant, for example. And so you define these roles, and each role have authorizations to do certain things. And so you could write a bunch of policies and rules to constrain them. So that's one view of thinking about this. Um, and however, there is a little bit of I think I mentioned at least two issues with this nice view. One is that these rules are usually incomplete. And as we can see in when we define these rules, it commonly used in cloud systems. For example, you get Amazon, Google, there's a bunch of IAM rules. You define the role and you assign, a this role to a particular user account. So you can similarly do the same thing for the agent, but those rules are usually incomplete. It's very hard to define exactly what you want ahead of time, especially, right? So it's difficult to do. The second one is that this um, the the or the kind of things we wanted to do, or the agent whether they will follow the rule. Because there's a one thing about enforcement point that we could implement. A access control is a clear point of enforcement, but many other rules we say are not enforceable or not at least in real time enforceable, for example, right? So you would say, well, I can't really enforce it, but I would, for example, make you accountable by auditing, by some kind of a after effect thing, or by a periodic checking of some kind. Um, and that's a separate issue, but it's also very prevalent in agents. Agents can run over quite autonomously for a long time. So during that period, we won't be able to go revisit or assign roles, for example. And so dynamic assignment or dynamic authorization would be a way out of that kind of the situation. So in any case, what this picture gives us is a spectrum of viewpoints from very strict role-based design to something that is maybe with a base role, but eventually allow dynamic behavior, and those behavior are probably the core point of this specification is designing how you would do that. If the agent need additional capability, what is the mechanism for it to be able to do that? Or if an agent want to delegate a task to a sub-agent, what is that mechanism ought to be? So anyway, that's my quick summary. And yeah, I'm sure Steve, you want to jump in.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, I agree with almost all of that. Again, except for using the idea of a long running agent, because I think it's the agent role that's long running, not the agent, and because the agent role always has to, as it evolves and is long running, whether it's within a particular task or outside of a particular task, um, it's going to be instantiating agents to get that done. So my question is, my primary problem is I need two different terms for the overarching thing and the actual instance of something operating within a model. So what do we call the actual workload that is in a model, the actual context that's evolving over time? Do we have a term for that?
Yeah, people been using the word agent all over the place, and that's unfortunately the easy way to say it, right? But we can say, for instance, in this diagram, we're trying to say, well, the agent is more complicated because it has memories for context, and these are accumulating over time. So their
No, there's
behavior are
two. Hold on.
dependent
See, that's
on.
that's oh, that's the point. There's two different things. There's the context of the agent role, which accumulates over time, and there's
Yeah.
also the context of a particular ephemeral agent, which is a much smaller set of context, which also accumulates over time. So once again, that ambiguity remains, even though both of those statements are correct.
Yeah, and therefore, I think one of the suggestions, I'm getting everybody's input here, is that we define the agent not by like how software is actually constructed, but rather say we define it as a unit of accountability. So in this case, an agent has, has a verifiable identifier, it's a TSP's endpoint, and can have authority and accountability. So this is the unit that eventually, if you want to make something accountable, you can point to say that what that is, and that's that's the dotted line that combines this.
So you don't want to differentiate it by calling it an agent role instead.
Well, a role in the typical like a RBAC kind of a definition, a role is a set of rules. And so you can basically go say, if such and such condition met, you allow or you permit. Otherwise, you deny. Those are access control rules.
I mean,
That's
there's
what.
many definitions of roles in different ways, and many definitions of agents in different ways. And there's a lot of historical conflict. And the thing is that we just need disambiguation. And I'm willing to accept any solution, but I need some sort of disambiguation between the instance that's running, which should have its own identifier, and the larger overall thing, which should also have its own identifier. They have to be separate things because they have separate identifiers.
Yeah, exactly. So this, if we talk about it, exactly that's what we're saying, right? It has a identifier, and it's what it is what it identifies. And therefore, this unit, you can delineate it, say this is a particular unit that has its own identifier, and I can say a lot of things about it. I can put rules, including roles, to this particular instance or identifier. And that's so one way to think about it. This allows us to have mega or aggregate too. So if you have multiple agents working together, can you have a identify for that a big thing? You could. Do you want to call that agent as well? That is a debatable thing, but we could add an adjective to it, for instance. But that could be the identifier. And in some cases, you would go to that particular aggregate and say what went wrong here is because this component did that, and which rules been broken, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I have no problem calling the larger structure an agent. I just want a name for the smaller thing. Do we call that the oracle? What is happening inside of the model? What is that process referred to as? Because it should not be referred to as agent because one is a total uh actuating, an actuating totality, where the other thing is just some generative thoughts. What do we call the generative process? Because the idea of my taxonomy was to separate out these different layers so that they could be individually certified, and you could have redundancy, between the layers. So if it fails at one layer and not at another. So for example, this Claude bot that's out right now, it's poorly defined because it its workflow essentially allows the agent or the generative part to go directly to the shell operating of the operating system, and there's not a definition of a workflow in between those two to control what happens. And otherwise, that workflow should be the thing that makes sure that it doesn't like erase your entire machine by checking deterministically on the generated output before it passes it on. So the by describing things as, agent versus workflow versus bot versus agent role, and having these be, compositions of larger and larger size, then we get that redundancy, and that's what I'm after.
Right. And so this picture is intentionally trying to make it as simple as possible, but you will see that it has a connection to other agents. So for instance, I can construct using this picture, one of the agent as the orchestrator or the coordinator, and then creating many sub-agents. For instance, one go write code, the other do testing, right? And so I have a coordinator, a coder, a tester, and that is a three-agent cluster together. Um, and I feel comfortable calling each one of them agent or component agent, and the aggregate also an agent. We'll probably need to add some adjective to it, but they could be that way, or
Yeah, I'm
I don't
fine with
know.
adjectives. Adjectives are cool.
Yeah, I don't know.
I
So
just don't know what those adjectives are. That's all.
because there's no one constraint to say exactly how they will compose themselves together, right? I can give that one example like that, which have clear defined roles very nicely. But you could also potentially conceive a just a bunch of agents going about. Maybe, for example, I can think of one thing is that you file bug report into a queue, and there are 10 agents. They each just randomly grab the next bug and go fix it. Well, that is also okay. There's nothing, very specific about a particular way they coordinate or compose together. What we are likely to say is that each instance would need have identifier, and each instance would need to be a TSP endpoint so that they are able to do dynamic policy propagation because the policy are not predefined.
Hey, Winston, we got three hands up.
Sorry. I don't know who's first, but maybe you guys got. Tim, how about you first?
They do so
Yeah.
in order, the order that you see across the top of the screen. So Jeff is first.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all
Jeff
right.
first. Sorry, Tim.
Well, my distinctions to some extent is sort of like human in the loop. What is the difference between a button on a UI that someone would click to establish a relationship that hides all the under the hood protocols and work that's required to do something, which is quite extensive and one of the barriers to adoption of a lot of this technology, where somebody would actually choose to click that and have all this code do things versus an agent doing the same thing without the human in the loop. And a lot of the discussions we're having about Claude and a lot of the problems are where where these agents can do things and access your local disk and do things with on behalf of you with your bank account or whatever, are all workflows having to do with agents with humans in the loop as opposed to agents running amok, so to speak. And so I think this discussion of the larger context of having this facility versus these specific actions that are taken, to me, I would frame with at what point and are humans required in the loop in order to monitor and supervise whatever the workflow in general or the agent in particular is doing. That's really what I wanted to say.
Yeah, so human in the loop typically, so it comes in multiple ways, potentially, right? So one of the most obvious one people think about that when they do is that there is a human user doing the prompting. And so when the agent come to usually like for example the agent will make a plan say do you agree do you approve this and or the agent want to go do I want to do a git clone do you allow whether you approve it and so all of those typically even with OAuth based the systems have the flow that you can do all this. However, the human in the loop is kind of a little misleading in some sense, very different from the traditional software because this particular loop is not predefined. The agents asking the question, agent can easily and often happens, or ignore that question, and you have very limited ability to disrupt. So that's why the time is very important here as well. Um, and so you can ask yourself the meta question when the agent decide to ask you for my permission. That is a decision made by the agent, not by you.
Yes, but this is very similar to the human, let's take the human analog in business in which executives have assistants. And to what extent does an executive empower
Exactly.
their assistants to do things on their behalf to delegate the responsibility?
Right. And so the second portion to address that question is we have control services. Basically, this will be, for instance, if we use a role-based system, this will be the one defining the roles. So you would say, "Hi, here are the roles, and these are the rules, etc." And you can try to enforce it when the LM trying to access any access point. So when you can easily set a rule where the agent or the LM decides that you need to go do a GitHub, a clone, right? And you could then, because the GitHub goes into an external system, there's an access control mechanism here that you can define a rule which says if you really go to a particular GitHub, you need a user to approve it. So that can be a workflow that is from agent to prompt the user then authorize it, and then with that authorization, you go access. So that's a clear definition of a particular way. But again, I want to point out none of these are complete. And at the end of the day, there are a lot of leeway you left out to the agent to quote unquote behave properly. And
Yeah.
those are unspoken and informal.
Yeah. Well, that's what I wanted to say. I'll pass it on to the next person.
Tim.
Yeah, so I don't have the answers, but I have some interesting observations. Just my experience is I no longer make a distinction between whether it's a human or some computational process going on. Um, it's hard to distinguish, and I think uh, yeah, it's really tough to do that. So what am I seeing in terms of patterns? There is some sort of control entity out there, the one that's calling the shots, defining the strategy, deciding what to go forward, and it's basically like as someone said, it's like a CEO and then who delegates, but that CEO could be like an agent itself.
Hmm.
And then the other piece are the brains, basically the effective model that's being used. And I'm seeing examples where models can be swapped out like real time and other models put in place. And it effectively it operates on, I think, what you described, the context and memories. That's basically what OpenClaw is doing, kind of your middle box there.
Yeah.
And then the third major piece is the body or the claws that actually do things. And that can be one or a multiplicity of, I think, the earlier discussion, these mini agents or subordinate agents that basically have the endpoints or the credentials or whatever to communicate with other systems or to affect other systems. And I'm just providing my observations. Like what I'm seeing now is that there's entities, these controlling entities that just want to hide behind all these other agents and then figure out what's the most effective model to use for a particular situation,
Hmm.
building on the context and memories that have been accumulated over like the last while or the last minute or the last hour or the last day, and then putting into effect the various clause that need to do things, whatever that might be. And that's just kind of the model that I'm observing emerging. So whether a human in the loop, uh, uh, I mean, there's going to be a case where you from a legal standpoint, you actually need to ultimately trace stuff back to some legal entity, human or organization. But I'm just seeing that that's tougher and tougher to
It
tougher and
is,
tougher
yeah.
to actually.
Yeah.
And the term I think I jumped out at me at one of the presentations I listened to is that we got to figure out how to coexist with these things. There may be humans behind the scenes or not. Don't know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway, that's just my observations.
Yeah, so this in this diagram, this box is meant to say, well, if you want to really directly have a human in the loop, literally, you could. And again, if you see this completely symmetric, right, you could have another agent, which may be your approver, and that you could do that too. All of this service, for example, like if we want to configure a IAM role, for example, that's clearly a human in some way in the loop is controlling it, and these rules are then enforced somewhere. So you can think of that all the potential ways that human can be in the loop. Most of the people, when they talk about human in the loop, they meant that you ask for a yes or no permission. So again, those are role-based or access control kind of policies, and those can be definitely be implemented here, same way as before, but with a better delegation scheme because the agent would not have to be pretending another human, but rather be the agent's own identity. And so that control and constraint we put on it can be much more specific and concrete. And so those are the mechanisms this current architecture would allow us to do. And I think we could elaborate each of the common scenarios, how that workflow would like, and maybe address it that way rather than trying to come up with perfect terminology. Drummond.
Yeah, I just wanted. I've been I'm making these points in the chat, but as soon as the question came up about composition and what's responsible for what is an agent or not, I'm not as tied to the terminology as I am just pointing out to folks the underlying starting assumption of the whole TrustRP stack, of which TSP is the spanning protocol layer two, is that everything that's communicating, everything that's interacting, whether or not you call it an agent, and absolutely, you've also got things, and that those human users in the upper left are agents of a different kind, right?
Yeah.
They all have verifiable identifiers. Everything that is communicating has a verifiable identifier. So it doesn't matter how far in the sub processes. Steve makes a point. Well, you can get all the way down to attach an identifier to I assume you mean a gauge description, or what is a is that what you meant, or is it
I meant
VAU
vague. Vague. I don't know how gauge.
vague? Yeah. Bottom line is, if it's something that needs to be identified, and if it can act, send and receive messages, then whatever you call it, it is an interactive participant, an entity participating in some kind of a trust over IP interaction. So, agents fit that perfectly because, oh, well, you have then a very clear way to identify and have it persistently identified to, key rotation, endpoint rotation, if you need those things over time. But this is the one consistent thing, that everything has a verifiable identifier, and therefore all of the messaging and transactions are verifiable and auditable. And that's what we're bringing to the party. So I wanted to point that out. When they
Exactly.
compose, when you have that chain of delegation among agents that might go very deep, that's
Yeah.
how it can always be auditable, and the chain of accountability can last. And last thing I'm going to say is, when you get to Tim's hard problem of proving it's a person or proving it's a legally responsible organization, that's what we're tackling the first person project.
That's right. That's right. And those, if you have humans, agents working together, doing something, right? And how they have to, how do you get a human approval? Well, that approval happens over that TSP link. And then if you want to, approve of a personhood, that's where that decentralized trust graph come along. And so all those things eventually what you can see is covered in this simple enough diagram, so that our specification essentially is goes spell out our details. So a workflow of a human direct approval or workflow from between agents, and what is actually accountable, what can be audited, all of that. I think it should be the bulk of our specification. So that's, this diagram just lay out how this would work. And we have a, clearly running code that can demonstrate this as well. So some of these would be additional language we added to it. And I think we addressed some of them. Again, if we couldn't have a perfect word for it, usually difficult to have, right? We will just have a description of a particular scenario. In that case, this is how the method of Go implement it. So it's very different from a traditional one based on purely on OAuth. But these are traditional systems, so to interaction with them would still involve the older specifications and how that process works. So it doesn't have to be from day one fully, like within the trust OIP domain. Any other comments?
So once again, to just be clear, your agent role does not include the context that subagents would be instantiated with. It only includes the rules. So what do you call that bucket of context and all of, in other words, the workspace that the agent can operate in and basically it's this whole container of autonomy. What
Yeah,
what
yeah.
what do you call that?
Yeah, yeah, very good. So if we think of this, right, this could be like a container or a machine has its own, like you running these open cloud, and this is look like that too. Um, and when people informally say agent, I think this is what they meant, the agent. So the agent in this case, if especially we want to, sort of define and ascertain or say things about agent's behavior, we clearly need to include the context and the LMs as part of the agent. And usually there is a control loop of some kind or the scaffolding, some people call operating system of the agent and that all that contained together, if you run as a container, then there's a clear definition of this thing is an agent. And then you're right.
Okay, that just brings up a quick question. So let's say the agent has access to the internet now. Is that considered its context or its memories? Because that's within its system that it can, operate on. So I,
Yeah, access to internet is it's represented here with tool use or internet services, etc. So that's um, outside of the
okay,
agent
so
proper.
there's a clear definition of what is an interior context and what's an exterior context. Okay, good.
Yeah, exactly. Now, this can get complicated because remember, even LLM, some of them have its own internet access embedded into it. So in when we get to that point, it's in the end, it's the matter of who controls it. So if you're okay with this LLM provider, for example, taking responsibility, again, in that case, you would want the LLM to have some kind of a verifiable identifier as well because this is essentially not a contained model, rather is a API accessed model, right? So in
And,
that case, you can think of this as a one of these services. And so that's okay too. But I
okay,
would start with the simple version as if you contain your own ILM and your memory is literally sitting there. So you could think of that as the simpler case. But I think the other case
now
works.
in that top box, why do you use LLM instead of model? Because I mean,
We
LLM is the current type of model, but you
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but
You are
model.
actually literally correct as well, not just because some models we use are not AI models, and that's true too. Yes. So that's a better way of saying it. And again, the simplest case is if you think of this model or a open source model that you literally own and copied. So that will make this diagram really clean.
And,
Now, if
and once again, so a model is a stateless thing, and then once it's given state, it becomes an agent. We're in agreement there.
you're right. You're absolutely right. When you're giving a state and some execution environment and some time to run it, then it becomes an agent.
Oh, atomic agent? What's it? I'm trying to come up with a good term for the smallest unit of agent. I mean,
If you want a like a really atomic, I'm guessing your meaning, right? So I can define an atomic agent if I own these models myself, and the memories are from scratch from zero, and then when it's done, you clean it. Well, then it's autonomous. I mean, sorry, atomic.
Yeah. Right, exactly.
But you have nothing left over. Everything's from ground up. You execute something and you clean it completely. Yes, that will be a atomic. So you can deploy that with a container and say, "Psh, one shot, done." Yes, you could.
Okay, great.
Whether that's a right thing to do, that's a different question. But yes,
Right. Yeah, and exactly. So eventually, any agent is going to break down into a number of sub-agents, which are ultimately atomic agents, which are ephemeral.
You know,
you could. You could.
Right.
And again, not everybody agree with that kind of or that's most effective way doing it, but that is definitely one way to do it.
All I'm saying, that's the reality of things. In other words, you always have agents while they're operating in memory. It's an executing function, but then even if you could put it to sleep and then wake it back up again. In other words, there could be long-running agents. For example, you have a long-running process. You might have a supervisor agent that essentially sends out a bunch of sub-agents to go do a bunch of things, but it's not running in the meantime. It waits until it gets the information back. So it's multiplexed
Right.
out of the system. It's not in the model.
Your artifacts are in the external memories. And so as long as the memory exists, your agent in a way exists. 'Cause you can
Yeah.
always
If you
revive
want to
it.
say, right, disk memory, right. I was saying the agent, it exists in a stasis, but it's not actively operating.
Right. So if you have a container running in the cloud, and if it's not busy, the container simply stays somewhere as a state of the cloud system.
Right, right,
Yeah,
exactly.
when there's a prompt, it can wake up and do stuff.
But
So
I would call that reinstantiating the agent rather than having saying it continuously exists the whole time. Because the problem with continuous existence is that it causes context rot and it causes just a destabilization the longer you do
yeah, but that's
inference on
implementation
itself
issue.
unnecessarily. So that's the idea. The point is that you want to instantiate and deinstantiate these things as often as possible because they actually perform better when you do.
That's an implementation issue. That depends on the model, depend on what their needs are, and also depend on how long you were talking about, right? So that conceptually doesn't change. So you could be a one shot. You could wake up and do stuff. Like if you write an agent, for example, to respond to Discord channels, for example, and that agent can go on and on almost forever. There's no particular reason why you want to, but you could, engineer could say, well, I want to do daily maintenance and shut it down and restart again. Of course, yes. That's all within within this picture to present. Those are all optional or good options to people may want to pursue. Haley mentioned only with LMs, there are other agent designs that can be different than that.
The the
Uh,
the the, the lack
Correct.
of
Yeah. Again,
context degrading
yeah,
open
we're trying
clause
to
doesn't necessarily need to be that.
ex you're absolutely right. And we are also the example we want to give is like with the simplest agent. And so this so-called atomic one, that would be to me, like that would be the simplest thing to have.
Well, and before agents entered the parlance, there were bots and robotic process automation, and a simple bot or agent may be three lines of code that says check for a signature on a document or forward to approving authority. And I think that's about as atomic as you can get by definition.
Well, I mean, that's what I wanted to do essentially with my text signing was to give bot and agent two different definitions so that they would both be useful as separate things. Um, where the bot would be the actuating totality that actually is the ability to do the things, whereas the agent would be restricted to just the generative component.
I think that's fair, Steve, in the context that bots have historically existed and existed before we did LLMs and agents. that were lines of code that performed a function autonomously. It was a
Yeah, but at
very
the
low
same
level.
time, agents as just being a bit of code that you delegate to, that actually does do things as, this has gone the agent bot ambiguity or, similarity or whatever you want to call it has goes way, way back.
Right.
Absolutely. And in this case, right, you can, if you want to push that harder, you can always argue, do you really need this model? Do you, yeah, all that is potential stretching the concept. But I think for practical reasons, for our specification, we just need a working concept that allow us to then explain if you push this way, that will be what you're getting, or you push this direction, this is what you're getting. And so it does not necessarily have to change this picture. Again, especially if we are talking about verifiable identifiers, we still need them, but whether you are a bot or agent, right? And so uh, these things are very similar in that nature. And we may even want to mixing, agents and users in some way too, because yes, that's also very similar in the way we deal with it. So if we step back of that in that way, the agent definition can be flexible. However, we want to, I guess, you know, tell these examples. And we may even say, hey, if this agent is so deterministic, everything's known, then you can call it bot. That's fine too, right? But we don't necessarily have to spend a lot of time on that for this particular specification. In other contexts, maybe, yeah. But here, our requirements are very similar anyway.
I mean, I have no problem with this picture. So
Good.
I just hope we don't run into, confusion down the road. That's all.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, there's always like we go back to this a container run first. Um, People may say, well, this is a long running agent and deploy this container. Like for example, I have a automated agent to do our meeting minutes for us, for example, right? And that's quite easy to do. And I do it as a container, I deploy it and I forget about it. So that is a long-running agent, even though it's not busy. Most of the time, once a week, it wakes up and do something and then go to sleep. And when it's asleep, it's really just a file sitting in the cloud. Until some message happens, you trigger this agent to wake up again and do something. So that's almost like a bot. But it's a little bit better than a bot because within that hour, the agent is actually actively working. You can talk to it, you can ask, you can ask for your permission to do things, etc. Right? And it can say, well, Steve, do you want me to record? Do you want me to capture this screen? Stuff like that. This bot may be able to do. And so that is a example of long running bot agent, I guess. On the other hand, same thing, you could deploy it completely separated. You could say every week I create a new one. And so that the rule will go to a different place. And, every Thursday morning in this hour, I kickstart this. Then that will feel like more like a bot, I guess. But
So, so
And then
you're
if you instantiate it with the same soul.md, is it the same bot or has it changed?
Exactly. Is that same or not? And if I keep the context, files around from the last week, then I think it's more like a real agent. And I would assume you want the VID to be identical. So same VID over these weeks and weeks, rather than create a new one.
what's
And
the you want
yeah.
two identifiers. You want one for the larger thing and then one for the atomic agent that's instantiated to do a particular task.
For me, yes. Well, the identifier you're talking about are the container identifiers. So the cloud already have those. Those already exist, right? So every time you spin up, you run a container, there's an identifier there. Spiffy, I think that's what they use. Um, uh, of course, that identifier exists, and a process has identified the operating system give you one, etc. Right? Those already exist. We're talking about is a new identifier, the verifiable identifier, to allow us to then put rules to this agent that is not statically programmed. And so those rules need some reference and enforcement mechanism. And that's what we are specifying. That's why TSP is useful, is allow you to be able to then say this particular agent by referencing the verifier identifier and set up a certain rules and for accountability, for example, and or authorization. And
Yeah,
and that way,
when the agent is archived after it's been run and it's just existing, in its state, whether it eventually gets reinstantiated or not, you want the identifier to point at that and say, this is the thing that happened.
exactly. And so it will be easier to stay constant identifier. So because your rules week by week are the same, so those rules and rows you specify referencing this particular identifier.
Right. If you're just putting the agent back into the model, it should keep the same identifier if the context is continuous from the time you turned it off.
Exactly, exactly. So we will keep the context, we will keep the identifier, then it will behavior is continuous. And our rules can be also don't have to change every week. Uh, Mick,
So
you
Mick,
have heads up?
Yeah.
yeah, Mick
So
just put his hand up.
I was going to say
Yeah.
I've spent way too much time in security the last little bit. So one of the concerns that I have with this, and this kind of goes back to the accountability issue, is um, let's just say that I build a really cool agent, and it accumulates a bunch of state and starts to perform operations that the rest of the community believes is inappropriate. That agent has an identity.
Yes.
Like now that I'm starting to get feedback, I shut it down, but I simply copy the context over to a new agent, generates a new identity. Nobody has any reputation or trust, and there's no accountability for it. How do we address that problem? I mean, this is
Yeah,
sort of,
that,
I mean, in
yeah.
some sense, Jim, this I think is the reverse of what you were asking about with the consistency of the identifier. If I want to preserve the reputation, that's a good thing. But if I don't want to preserve the reputation, how does that fit?
So I have a demo we've been doing for quite a while. Which happens is that the human users who are interacting with the system would be able to inquire about the status of the identifier. So the identifier has history. Essentially, you have verifiable, sorry, history of the provenance of the identifier. So if the identifier being replaced, then what the user will see is that this entity is new and has no reputation. So that's the way you eventually get back to it. You're right that there's also meta kind of a issue here is that if a user acting as an administrator go remove things, etc., that particular operation, whether you come from human prompt side or from this kind of a configuration side, probably are locked, and so that could be also taken as accountability of somebody take a action, and this action is not doing what it's supposed to be or being dishonest or some way. And so that could be a separate way of getting back to it. But the user, without knowing all of this, what I see is that the history is very short. This is a new agent.
I'm trying to roll what Mick was saying around in my head a little bit, and I don't disagree with your response, Wenjing, but I was
Okay.
thinking, so I create an agent and instantiate an identity, and that identity serves for authentication and authorization. So
Yeah.
if the behavior of the if of the agent is deemed to be inappropriate, then I don't necessarily have to attack its identity or its instantiation. I simply change the parameters of its authorization based on RBAC or ABAC or TBAC or whatever the model is that we're leveraging for that.
Absolutely, absolutely. That would be my recommendation too, normally when you're operating it. But in case that I think we're talking about the case where the admin didn't do that. Instead, it trying to erase the history and trying to pretend there's no problem. And you can tell that is going on by seeing the history of the identifier. That's what I'm suggesting.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely agree. And it,
Yeah.
it ties right into the next meeting I jump into in the agency project where we're working on
Right.
auditing for identity as an extension to be able to show that it's performing as authorized.
Exactly, exactly. So we could, for example, do auditing if this agent's being alarmed for a long time, then you have a lot of information to audit. So you can potentially give the agent some kind of a you know reputation or a grading of its behavior, for instance. Um, I thought there was a German you have hands up earlier.
The conversation covered it. I was just pointing out. Oh, Jim, I didn't. I just learned. I think I heard a hint about this. That Jim's co-leading the identity work group at the agency project. Cool. Because I was going to say, I was just clarifying that the whole TEA spec starts with if it's going to use TSP, then the agents and all the interactions have VIDs. I'm just clarifying that that's true.
Yes. So
Yeah,
in the ideal world, all these boxes, each one have one of the has a bit.
yeah, exactly. And
Yeah. If
as
not, you have something, similar, not equivalent, but something similar in that nature to capture that area. So we can define this particular line, we can define this line, and we will say, ideally, you want all that. If not, what are the sort of integration point of outside of the system?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
What I love about this particular diagram and the fact we spent the whole meeting, having conversation around it is it does sort of surface all the areas, but the thing I will be able to use, Wenjing, from this point forward is take this diagram and put a nice round a highlight on that upper left corner and say that's the giving vids and and with the full control and privacy needed by humans. That's what we're doing. The first person project is like, there it is. That's
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly. And
I
this is
love it.
also to show like how the different projects relate to each other. Because this is how you can plug in here, and this human user would have its own VID, and then you can talk to an agent, and the conversation between them can be audited. You can also prove you are actually human instead of these agents. You can trying to do proof of the agent has the authority, or you can delegate the authority, all that sort of
Yeah,
thing can be built into the loop. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Steve is here. Apparently Haley wasn't just her boss, but the discussion we had at the Quai Summit last week, which is all about personal AI agents, was just right on the money on this stuff. And I think that whole community will really get off on this quite a bit. I got to jump to another call too, so I will say goodbye. But super cool stuff. Let's get this back out.
And I of course am the primary conduit to that community. So that's
Yes.
what
Thank
Excellent.
you, Steve, for
Excellent.
that. That's
Thank you.
I
fantastic.
mean, at least I'll try to be.
Good. Awesome.
All right. So, anyone want to make a last comment?
Yeah, if you're interested, I'd be more than happy to brief the group on what we're doing in agency around identity at some point.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much. We can schedule that. See if the next week you are available. We'll do that.
Groovy.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank
What's
you
what's
very
the
much.
next step of the document? So the intro is fairly wrapped up, it seems like. So how's the next
Yeah,
uh
there's a few like input I got. I'll probably revise a little bit, and then we'll put this architecture. This will give me right away a list of terminologies, and then we can do spec out essentially, what is the central requirement here, like we mentioning here, VIDs, TSC endpoint, etc., right? And then we can start to talk about the workflows of authorization and accountability. So that defines like each of these detailed link and how they interact with each other.
Yeah, yeah, that because now I'm suddenly seeing maybe we could just start using the word agent with like agent and then in parentheses, comma, this, that, the other thing. So we could essentially express multiple levels of agency and how you're
You're
embedded
right.
through
Yeah,
a
yeah,
sort of
yeah.
rather than trying to use adjectives, which are also going to be sloppy, why not use an actual formal numerical taxonomy? It just hit me. That seems
Yeah,
a
so
better
if
way to
there's an
go.
ID, I can say agent underscore this ID, and that is
But
very
right.
exact.
But for example, like the larger agent, and remember you have in the example that was given before, you might have a particular instantiated agent which is doing something for a larger agent. And so essentially it would be identified as instead of just agent Y, where the larger agent was agent X, it would be identified as agent X comma Y rather than just being identified as Y. You know what I'm saying?
I see.
Because it
Okay,
originates.
yeah,
So you put the origin, you put the delegation path into the name of the agent. You
yeah.
just say then that the name of the agent is its delegation path. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, you could. But at the end of the day, the identification is starting from the verifier identifier. So this is the beginning point. And then the agent can build a whole bunch of things, including its credentials. Um, so all those are identification to the particular agent. If an agent is a supervisor, we may want to give it a credential to say it is the supervisor.
Oh yeah, 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 for sure. You
Yeah.
definitely want to have different levels of credentialing based upon how many commas deep something is.
Exactly, exactly. So you are right in that sense that there are these identities that a particular agent may may be performing, right? The role may be a combination of things, and that can be happening too. And especially if it's a dynamic, then these can be at the runtime added and removed. So that also complicates things. But we can definitely rely on, in the very end, a verifiable identifier. And so you say that is the particular one I'm speaking about.
Yeah, I just want the names to convey the relationship between entities. So an entity's name to convey its relationship to other entities wherever possible, and then to have an identifier
But the
derived from the
relationship can
identifiers of
change.
those related entities. What?
The relationship can change.
Yeah,
So
exactly. So the name could change with the relationship. And because if a relationship changes, then obviously that new relationship should have a new identifier as well. So, yeah.
yeah, you could try to do naming with an appendix of many strings, or you can do naming with a mapping. So there's a table map it.
Yeah, 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 that's true too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Either way is okay. It's definitely feasible to do. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Okay, cool.
Cool. So we should be able to make a relatively quick progress from here because once this is set, then the rest are much more, di- you know, um, concrete. So we can make a very rapid progress, hopefully.
Okay.
Excellent. Well, thank you for staying on. This is coming together, and I think a lot of other effort can also be mapped. If we talk to other groups and they know what we're doing, and they can decide, how much they want to use what we do here, or how much they will fit in. And some of the group become very clear, but others may be still a little bit kind of hard to say. All right,
All
and
right.
I'm
See,
hoping, I don't know,
I think it's just the two
before.
of us left.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the section is working in a different hour, but I think hopefully We are in March. Hopefully before summer, we should have a draft.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah. And there's a code already, so if anybody want to like try it out and test it, we can do that too.
Okay, I'd be interested in doing that.
Yeah,
All right.
very good.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Appreciate it. Yeah. Bye bye.